This is Peter,
And this is Tom.
and you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to our podcast. Tom,
Hello.
as you said, before I click record, this may not potentially be your thing. But then again, it's not my thing either.
It's just something I feel like you've been asking to do for a while. Like, oh, let's do
Sure.
this one. Let's do this one. So I was like, and I've never said no. It's just we always came up with a different one, like the day of or a couple
hours,
a little bit before, a couple hours beforehand. But it's one that we've definitely, I guess, talked about, or you were inspired to do from watching History Channel a little bit. So it works.
Yeah, it works. So what are we talking? What are we talking about?
We're going to be looking at the history or the rise of basically the American automobile industry, right? American cars, American muscle, right? There you go. Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to get to American muscle, but we are going to talk about, you're right, like the history of American auto industry, because it's extremely important. For most of the 20th century, actually, if you look back at history, the United States economy and how well it was doing was judged solely on how well the auto industry was doing.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're a country that's relying on automobies. So it's the dominant mode of transportation.
Yep.
And for the early years, we were like the big manufacturing country when it comes to cars. Well into the 80s, I guess, right? And
80.
We were easily the largest producer of automobiles. Yeah.
And it ended in the 80s because of Japanese cars. Japan took us over. But and as you mentioned, this had a lot to do with the geography aspect, because the United States, first of all, we have an overabundance of natural resources. We also have a huge population, and we happen to be spread out like across a vast area in the United States. So therefore, in the car industry, it almost seemed like we were made for it, for each other. And that's kind of where this comes out of. There's a lot of interesting characters here, but I think we're mostly going to concentrate on the big three.
The big three, right? Which would be General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford, right? That's what we're talking about. Those are the ones. Just so we both are on the same the same wheelhouse here with the same big three. Yeah, so it's General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford. And they really come to be, I mean, they're around beforehand, but they really dominate because of the Great Depression. And I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yep. So let's kind of just briefly start off with cars, period. Like how that came to be, a little brief history of cars, because there is a common misconception.
Well, I'm sure you've heard about this. Yeah, so when one car meets another car, and they fall in love, right? Isn't that? I know. I'm sorry. Yeah. That's a dad joke, but that's how you said that.
It's cool. Well, you are.
Okay. Dad, moving on. Moving on. Okay.
I'm full of dad jokes. That's kind of what I do. But anyway,
outside the big three. That's what I was going to
start. Yeah, I was going. So actually, believe it or not, 1769 was the first ever steam-powered automobile that was like capable of human transportation. It was built by Nicolas Cugnot, which was a French inventor. He had a background in military engineering, and he actually designed the vehicle in 1717, by the way, 65, to transport cannons for the French army. And this was so ahead of its time. It was like this three-wheel steam-powered thing. We're talking like George Washington times, and people are like, yeah, this guy's nuts, And then in 1808, another French inventor, Rivaz was his last name, designed the first car that was powered by an internal combustion engine. It was also fueled by hydrogen and had some form of an electric ignition, which is kind of cool. Then 1870, it's almost like nothing really happens for like 70 years almost.
Yeah.
In 1870, a German inventor, Siegfried Marcus, built the first gasoline-powered combustion engine. He placed it on the push cart, and that kind of like resulted in like the first sophisticated combustion engine car. We had a steering, clutch, brake, and essentially what like would it go on to influence cars going forward. And then sticking with the Germans, you have around the same time, Nicholas Otto patented the four-stroke engine, internal combustion engine. Rudolf Diesel, which kind of that you guys hear that around sometimes. Similar, right? Beginning of diesel engine. It's named after the guy that did it, Rudolf Diesel, in 1897. It's kind of crazy. But the first real like car that like really gave a lot of people a run for their money was Carl Benz, when he built his first gasoline-powered automobile that was sold to the public was in 1885. But then he really hits it big with the Carl Benz does it with the 1901 Mercedes. designed by Wilhelm Maybach for the Daimler Motor Company, and it's actually credited in 1901 as the first modern motor car. It had 35 horsepower. The engine weighed about, it's not crazy, right? 14 pounds per horsepower.
On an engine, yeah,
And
imagine that.
Yeah, right. But a top speed of 53 miles per hour. Anyway, by 1907,
Well,
I thought was an
that's
interesting.
fast for the time, though.
Right, I thought so too. When I saw it, I'm like 53 miles per hour. What?
Yeah.
1909 though. This is
Every day
kind of
that's going crazy.
Yeah, I know. Imagine. 1909 though, which is interesting. He actually had Daimler had so Benz and Daimler had the biggest integrated automobile factory in all of Europe, and it employed some 1,700 workers to produce fewer than 1,000 cars per year. And Henry Ford just like laughs at that in another decade. He's like, wait, how long? How many do you only make 1,000 per year, and we have all these workers? So things kind of change. In the United States, you have the Oldsmobile
Just a
Company,
bit.
which kind of picks up. Did you find anything on Oldsmobile?
Yeah, the old motor vehicle company, right?
Yeah.
So that was in 1886. Ransom E. Olds, right? He received a patent actually for the first car that ran on just gasoline.
Yep.
And then he sold the Olds Motor Vehicle Company. He moved to Detroit to open the Olds Motor Works, and he built the famous curved dash Oldsmobile, and that's like the beginning of what we know.
Like a modern car, yeah.
That's that. He began producing cars. He basically began producing cars after that.
It's
For the
crazy.
next 14 years. Stuff like
They
that.
said that this was actually Oldsmobile was the company that started the idea of producing, or rather mass producing vehicles using some form of assembly line. They said, based on what I read, it was Oldsmobile. Ransom E. Olds was the owner that started making cars before Henry Ford did, and this is like 1901 to 1906. Which is, they say, was basically like a motorized buggy, like horse buggy.
Well, that's what it was. That's some of the other companies were calling it like horseless carriage, the
Yeah.
things of that nature, like the whatever it was called, the buggy company, right? Horseless buggy company, things like that.
Well, that was the thing though, because if you look at 1901, or if you guys type in 1901 Mercedes into Google, you realize that it actually looks like a car. It looks cool. And, this was being done in Europe in 1901 versus whatever Olds was putting out there. Again, this is pre-Ford. Literally looked like a carriage, like a horse buggy. So there's a problem here because the United States automakers are definitely not keeping up with the Joneses when it comes to, making cars look like they're actual cars. But that kind of changes, and that ultimately changes. You want to go to Henry Ford?
He's a big player in all of this. Yeah, good. What do you got about Ford?
Well, one thing about Ford
stuff.
is
Obviously, everyone knows about the assembly line and stuff like that. I mean, I know we always say this, but we can definitely do a podcast just on Ford himself, like the man.
Oh, yeah. He was not the nicest guy. No, 100%. No. So when I was looking at Ford, what it really started popping up rather was these bicycle mechanics, Jay Frank and Charles Durea, I guess. Durea. Let's go Durea. Springfield, Massachusetts. And apparently they designed the first successful American gasoline automobile, these two Durea brothers, in 1893. And it also won the first ever American car race in 1895. And apparently went on to, make like the first sale of American-made gasoline car in the next year. So this was an awesome statistic. I don't know if you saw this, but by 1899, there was actually 30 American manufacturers.
There's a whole bunch of cars. There's a whole bunch of these companies out there. Small. They weren't these big companies, but yeah, they were all over the place.
Just making cars. Yeah.
Yeah, just making cars because it was the new thing. It was like one of these the new invention. And even Ford, when Ford came out at first, he wasn't really super successful. But in 1903, he found Ford Motor Company, and a month later, he produces his first car. And then 5 years is when 5 years later is when the company launches the Model T, which everyone's heard of the Model T, obviously, because it's really the first affordable car, and it kind of transforms the American way of life, basically. And so they produce it all the way up until 1927 was the last year in production. And by that point, they sell over 15 million Model Ts, which is a huge number when you think about it. They have 15 million Model Ts out on the road. And there's a lot of them still out there today. I know they're refurbished and stuff like that. But Model Ts they can still run.
By the way, it was like an ultimate off-road vehicle, which makes it so funny because
Yeah.
he designed it for a farmer. Like he had farmers in mind when he made this. And the wheels are wooden. They're super thin. I mean, it goes, if you see videos on YouTube of this thing goes through mud like nothing. I mean, it's awesome in a sense.
And the idea
But
about having all these interchangeable parts, it just makes it
yeah.
easy when something goes wrong to get it fixed.
Well, they said you could get it in every color as long as it was black
Yeah,
because
I
it
remember
only
seeing
came
that.
in
Yeah,
black.
it's all it
Um,
came. It was like that's it.
yeah. What's really interesting, if you look at a background here, so he actually came up with an idea of a motorized, what he called a quadricycle, his first gasoline-powered horseless carriage. Again, this was one of those horseless carriage times in 1896, and he was working as an engineer for none other than Edison. So Henry Ford was working for Edison Illuminating Company, and that's when he came up and kind of tinkered on the side. He came up with this quadricycle. Then, as you mentioned, 1903 releases the first ever Model A, and then things really change. Once he kind of puts it all in, he wants to produce this affordable, efficient automobile. But I mean, this guy was, first of all, his Model T Ford revolutionized America, not just the car industry,
Everything.
but
Yeah,
just
it was
everything.
American life. American. Now you could afford a car. Everyday
Yes,
people could afford a car, and by doing that, just opens up the way for the travel, driving around the country. Everything else starts
roads,
right now. Roads. We have to have roads. We
gasoline.
have to have gas
Yeah,
stations. We have to have service stations. You have to have traffic lights. Like all these things start to come into play because the Model T is there's 15 million of them now on the road, right?
yep.
You also talk about the 1920s, right? America's coming out of World War One. They have all this money. They have the money. They're feeling great, so they're able to do this sort of stuff. And it's just going to create this car culture that is still around today. Let's face it.
Yeah. By the way, did you see that, like the statistic that at the height of its production, they were making so many of them because of these interchangeable parts and assembly line that Ford Motor Company was able to turn out one Model T every 24 seconds. Like
I did see
that's
something like that. Yeah, something
crazy,
like that.
crazy.
Yeah,
But obviously,
it wasn't really like a super advanced car, but it was like you said, it was this all-terrain machine, basically, you
yeah,
know, and it
yeah.
just kind of like changed everything.
Well, but Henry Ford, unfortunately, does get competition here. Like this doesn't. Um,
Well, it's
by the
capitalism;
way,
it's going to have its competition.
yeah, but just real quick, did you know that the first is so the four cylinder 20 it was 24 horsepower, the Model T, right? It was first offered in 1908 and sold for $825 initially, right? They got the production so, you know, I guess it grew so much, the production itself,
Low,
that
yeah.
by the time that it was withdrawn in 1927, its price was reduced to $290 um per car. So it went from 825 to 290. It truly was a very affordable car. Um, it wasn't. I mean, an average. They said like an average 1912 roughly, right? Um, Annual wage in the United States was like $600, and this he was selling this for 290. Like I'm thinking how much cars are today, and an average American wage. I mean, there's no way you could buy a car that cheap today. Which is kind of
No, no.
crazy.
Well, yeah, not a new car, not even close. Yeah, actually, you couldn't even buy like a used car if it wouldn't run.
No,
Parts
no
would be
way.
worth more than that.
So what happens here is Ford's mass production techniques. Obviously, people are looking at this and they're like, "Oh, okay, we could do this," and other automobile manufacturers start to really kind of chase him in a sense. Um, and also, what you have here is these companies are introducing the same idea of making cars quicker, and they're now he's got competition. So when I looked at the statistic too, they said that active automobile manufacturers dropped from 253 of them in 1908 to only 44 by 1929. So 1908, and that's like 20 years, went from 253 manufacturers to just 44. However, by 1929, so in the eve of the Great Depression, 80% of the industry's output was accounted for by Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. The only independents that were really around by the Great Depression, besides Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, which were making 80% of all the cars, was Nash, Hudson, which is made popular again with the Cars cartoon, Studebaker, Packard, basically.
Studebaker.
But they were all wiped out by the Great Depression. I mean, they say Packard kind of lasted a little bit to World War II, but more or less, like you said early in the podcast, that Great Depression left us with three major companies.
Yeah,
So
big
General
name company. The only
Motors,
ones really survived. Yeah, General Motors. So, what was it founded? What 1908, right?
Hmm.
Flint, Michigan, by William Durant, and it basically they have instant success of the company because they basically acquire a lot of those smaller companies. They
Yep.
acquire Cadillac, Buick, and then under some new leadership, the company becomes the largest car manufacturer in the world for a while. Um,
Yep.
Basically becomes really, really effective. And GM was known for its innovation, catering to different social classes. They had a bunch of different varying price structures. So they kind of like had the same car, but different amenities and stuff built in. And it became just well liked. And that's one reason why they were to make all these cars. And it just, again, just blew up. These cars were affordable for different classes. So as you were able to kind of, as your socioeconomic status change, you could afford a different car, and that's really
Yep.
what appealed when it comes to General Motors.
That's what it was. And ultimately, the
Yeah,
ultimate goal was to get to having like a Buick was a higher level, Pontiac was the
yeah,
cheaper level, Chevy was like the kind of middle of the road. But like as you were rising in the social class, the idea was that there was a car for you by General Motors, and the car that you aspired to get was the Cadillac. The Cadillac was the luxury brand of General Motors, and very similarly, Ford kind of adapts that as well because Ford's like, dang it, we only offer Ford. So then they kind of eventually go into having a Mercury and then a Lincoln. Mercury's are
and
not around anymore.
Cadillac had fancy things like power steering,
Yeah, like
windshield
that was one of the
wipers
first
on
ones. Yeah,
every vehicle. That was like a big deal. Have you ever drive a car that didn't have power steering? Like
I did
it's
back in the
different.
day. Actually, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure my first car did not have power steering. Actually, it was such a basic version of like Chevy Colt, and it had no power steering. It was a 5-speed manual transmission, and it didn't have the RPM, so you had to listen to the engines when you had to switch the gears. And it only came with one mirror on the driver's side. That's it, stock. Like I had a car that literally was like the
Nothing.
bare necessities. Yeah.
But it got you from point A to point B. That's the whole point. Like
That's how
and
right.
at the time though, it was all you wanted, all you needed when you get that your
Crazy.
first car.
One of the most famous popular, or rather the most famous and or popular brands of GM is Chevrolet. And Chevrolet actually is named after a popular road racer, Luis Chevrolet. He was a road racer at the time, and Durant actually sought him out. This popular driver, because he was hoping that reputation would give a car brand a boost. So he kind of brings Chevrolet in and starts off this like offshoot brand based on this race car driver.
The Chevrolet
Um,
Motor Company.
Yep. So basically this is kind of interesting to see that by 1919 it was Chevrolet, the brand Chevrolet, under the umbrella of GM, that was the leading competitor to Ford Motor Company.
What they did was
Um,
Chevrolet bought up all the GM stock to
yeah,
basically gain control of the company. So
yeah.
that's basically what they were able to do.
Durant also, besides Chevrolet, if you're looking at it, he also started shifting into like his cars became more sleek looking. That was his thing, right? It was like this shift from consumer shift towards luxury, high performance vehicles, versus Henry Ford was still stuck in like this is a workhorse. Like my
Yeah,
car is designed
practicality, what it actually
exactly.
does,
Yeah,
and then it
and it
became
was
more and more what it looks like.
yep. And GM is the one that's like the company that's like, no, because the car, and it kind of makes sense because to them, a car will eventually, like people will not buy new cars. You want people to buy cars. I mean, that's the whole premise of it, right? So as car sales stall, there's this new idea of like, well, what do you do, right? I mean, because eventually there's no replacement demand. If the car works, why replace it, right? So GM is the one that thinks of what is known as like plan, obsolete almost, right? Making these cars obsolete, and not in the sense obsolete as in they're going to break, but it is the GM advertising department that decides that there's some form of technological stagnation in cars. There's only so much you can do technologically in a car versus like, okay, it's going to take you from point A to point B. So what we need to do is we need to innovate, make the more dramatic innovations, basically change the way they look. I mean, like find more gadgets, change the way they look continuously. So that way people will want to replace their cars because something will look sleeker. Something will look newer. Something will look faster, even if it's not faster. And the kind of
Yeah,
GM came up with that idea. Like today, you have a new model car that comes out. Henry Ford made the same car, literally the same car in the only color for like 20 something years.
yeah. People wanted change. They want variety, and
Yeah,
so that's
variety.
basically what
Yeah,
they're doing. Different colors, different, like you said. If you look at all those cars from this time period, like the designs are different.
Yep. He
And
also
plus, plus appeal to the eyes and stuff like that.
Yep. And 1930s is also when GM came up with the idea of like every few years we're gonna just change the product, like freshen it up. But in between, they did like annual minor facelifts, which is again something that happens today. But this is all advertising executives in 1930s that were like, dang it, if you people have a car, why do they want to buy another one? So let's make them want to buy another one. It's almost like you want to make the consumer dissatisfied with what they have, so they trade it in and presumably, right, get a more expensive new model. Again, which goes back to what you said before, is that so let's offer them a model for, hey, I'm kind of poor, oh, I'm middle class, oh, I'm wealthy. Nuts. But Ford loses massive sale here. It's, the lead in sales drops down a lot to Chevrolet. By 1936, so in the middle of the Great Depression, General Motors, claims 43% of all United States market, and Ford only has 22%. It actually falls behind Chrysler, which had 25%. So I guess we could move into Chrysler a little bit, but this is interesting in a sense that here is Ford, and there's this misconception, even among my students, like Henry Ford invented a car. No,
okay, no, he did not.
But all new cars, exactly. And then I think all cars in the 20s and 30s were Fords. Not really. Actually, Ford kind of fell out here, out of favor. So, what do you have about anything for else for GM before we hit up Chrysler?
No, I think that's good for GM. Like I said, let's look at Chrysler a little bit. So obviously Walter Chrysler, right? He was once the head of GM, right? I think he was in charge of the Buick division. So he kind of knows about like the upper class or the higher class cars and all that good stuff. And basically he renamed the Maxwell Commerce Company from bankruptcy, and he renamed it the Chrysler Corporation in 1925. And again, it's in Detroit, right? And became known for its mid-price cars, right? They had really impressive performance, all right? They're very well engineered. And the company acquired the Dodge Brothers Company 3 years later, which put Chrysler at the bottom of the big three. And he basically has financed the construction of the Chrysler Building in 1928, which was the world's tallest building by the time it was done.
Yeah.
And he just becomes part of that big three that make up basically 75% of sales in automobile sales in America.
Yeah.
Other than that time. And you have all these like the the Dodge Dart GT, but all types of different cars. If you think of it, like all the ones that Chrysler has, it's a lot. It's their Dodge.
And Chrysler's gone through
aren't they with Jeep now? Chrysler, Dodge,
they own Jeep. They own Jeep.
Yeah.
They own Jeep, and then now it's Fiat owns all of them. I mean, because
Fiat buys them all after 2008, right?
Whenever things kind of don't pan out for them. But what's interesting about Chrysler is actually Walter Chrysler's brought into the Maxwell Motor Company, right, in early 1920s to like help managing it. You know what I mean? Like
all these guys, they work together in one company and they branch off and create their own company for a while. I mean, it's all like it's all the same people.
Like, keep it in the family. I like that. They all kept it in the family.
Okay. There you go.
So early 1920s, Maxwell Company brings in Walter Chrysler, instead of helping like pick up the Maxwell Motor Company from bankruptcy, actually reorganizes it and purchases it and turns it into the Chrysler Company. And he organized that in 1925. And then his cars were some of the first one. Like his big thing was make it affordable, but also he was looking for that technological advancement. Like, how can I make my car better gadgets, anything? How can I make it better than my competition? And a lot of innovation, actually. High compression engine, carburetor, air filter, lubrication inside the engine, oil filter. So like you guys get your oil change and you have a new oil filter in the engine. That first time that happened was in a Chrysler. Also, first practical mass-produced four-wheel drive hydraulic brakes, right? Rubber engine mounts to reduce vibration were first showed up in a Chrysler. I never thought about that, like rubber engine mounts to reduce vibration. Like, you're right, they had to strap the engine back in the day to the actual metal frame. That couldn't be comfortable in any way, shape, or form. Like, I thought I was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was all these things, and like coming up with, again, it was engineering. They were known for being like well-built cars.
Yep. And then, just again, because every single car company has like the lesser company for the affordable, the affordable cars. So he does the same thing. Chrysler actually creates the Plymouth brand. And that is
That's
basically
right.
the
Yeah,
Plymouth brand
Plymouth.
was the low priced end of the market. Like that's your entry level. If you can't afford a Chrysler, you could buy a Plymouth. And then when he buys the Dodge company, Dodge was kind of cool. I found that to be a very interesting story because it's the Dodge brothers.
I didn't look them up individually, but I did find out. Well, some of it, like brothers John and Horace, right? That's what
Yep.
you're talking about. So they opened up a shop again in Detroit, and what they're doing is they're just producing parts for cars at first. That's it.
Yep.
And then Ransom Olds from Oldsmobile hired him to build the famous Curve Dash for the Oldsmobile. That's what they were
Yep.
built to do. And after that, they had a contract with Henry Ford to help build engines and axles, transmissions, things like that. And they eventually find their own company, I think in 1913, the Dodge Brothers Motor Company. And then less than a decade later, after debuting several cars and assisting with the war effort, which they all do, they kind of pass away, but they get, like you said, they get acquired by the other brands. But they come up with a lot of the cars. I think of like the Dodge Charger and stuff like that, like
Yep.
iconic cars are all coming
Yep.
from this brand. Based and it's the same thing, just it's more of known for, I guess, their style and performance. What's under the
Yep.
hood a lot of time too, with a lot of their brand
Yeah, I
engineering
mean, think of like Dodge
aspect of it.
Viper. Yeah, it's still to this day. I mean, the idea of Dodge, even it was part of Chrysler, and by the way, it fit into the Chrysler family when it was purchased by Chrysler. The Dodge brothers sold the company. The reason they kind of Chrysler wanted them because the Dodge brand from these two brothers really fit their mold for like that mid-price brand because they had Plymouth. Plymouth was their low brand. They had Chrysler as their high brand. So they needed a mid brand. So Dodge became the mid brand, which is kind of interesting how like you start looking at it, all these cars have like their own versions of like brands within brands in a sense, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, and they have one for everyone. Like everyone, they're appealing to different parts of the American population in order to get a car. You're going to be able to find something that you like. You're going to be able to find something that fits your price point. You're going to be able to find something that has some of the characteristics that you want, and then purchase it. And that's one
Yep.
reason why they're still thriving at this point, anyway, up until the mid '60s.
And Chrysler, it's funny because also Chrysler continues buying companies. I mean, they bought the AMC, American Motor Company, which initially owned Jeep at the time, and Eagle. I don't know if you remember. Remember Eagle? That was
Yeah,
an
yeah.
Eagle. Yeah. So that was all part of American Motor Company. That was purchased by Chrysler probably like, I want to say early 80s. I mean, they were, until they themselves kind of things didn't pan out. But let's go back in time a little bit. World War II and the auto industry. So, because I think it plays a big part in restructuring the auto industry, because before World War II, there are more than three major automakers, right? Like we mentioned
Yeah.
them before. They do exist, but after World War II, it really is just these three that are the main ones. So what really happens in World War II? I mean,
Well, basically, GM's president, right, William
yep,
Coodston, he gets actually a call, right, from President Roosevelt
yep,
that wants him to control the American military production for the war. So he left his position as an executive to work for the government for a dollar salary. The guy was already like,
yeah,
a
he's rich.
millionaire by today's
Yeah,
standards. And basically, American automobiles scrambled to make transition towards the total war effort. And that's why I always like just tell my students, like, total war, when a country commits to total war, it's very different. They're not building these cars. These companies are not building cars and stuff. They're building tanks. They're building bombers. And
yeah.
the big three automakers like started building tanks. Chrysler built tanks. Um, the government owned a plant. They started building more tanks. I think Chrysler themselves built more tanks than all of Nazi Germany did by the time the war was over. That's the amount of tanks they're turning out. Ford began building bomber plants. They began building bombers, right? Just building aircrafts. And they wind
Well,
up
that was
building
this is called the
one,
Willow Run. I mean, the Willow
yeah,
Run was
bomber plane. Yeah, they
insane.
built one B-24 bomber, Liberator bomber, every hour.
How crazy is that?
That's crazy. That's the main thing. Like you talk about what was America's big contribution in World War II.
Boom.
It was just the materials. Like it was just the raw materials they were able to just send to the war effort. Like just all these bombers. Like think about one bomber an hour.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. Like the other
I can't.
countries just couldn't keep up with that.
You can't fathom that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing that's crazy is that he basically said when the government came to Henry Ford, they're like, all right, you figured out how to revolutionize the auto industry. Like, we need these bombers. And he took 975 acres of his own farmland that he owned in Michigan and constructed the the Willow Run, which was cold, as you mentioned. But
Yeah.
this was at the time the largest war factory in the world, and actually in world history. There was a adjoining airfield right to it. That was this is another thing. Talk about PR. He hires Charles Lindbergh to be his test pilot, right? Which is nuts. But the way, if you guys ever look up Willow Run, this humongous factory, they would literally start from little parts, and at the very end, a full blown B-24 Liberator U.S. bomber would pull out of this hangar, and it would pull right onto the adjacent airfield and just fly off to whatever it needed to go to base wise. Like, that was
And they're just ready to
insane.
go. Yeah, they're just ready to go. Think
Is
about
that insane?
building a bomber in an hour. Like that's
I can't. I
crazy
can't.
when
I
you think
can't.
about it.
I
But
just can't.
again, it's
Hey,
a war
Henry
effort. Yeah.
Ford. That's Henry Ford. But yeah, so basically, I mean, what's also interesting? Kind of, I looked at. I don't know. It came to me right now when I was doing research for like World War II books and stuff. It was the fact that you couldn't buy you couldn't buy a 1943 Dodge. Like,
Yeah.
in 1945, you started seeing ads again in newspapers, like for the first time ever, and like 1945 Dodge or Chevy or Ford, because they ceased production of vehicles. So, and then the cars that came out the year after the war ended in 45 were basically 1941 models.
Yeah,
Just
they had
yeah,
to
they're
go
just
back to
like
the drawing board,
yeah,
recreate
let's
things.
just restart
You had to
this.
see really what the Americans were looking for at that point. Like what was going to be the new styles and stuff like that.
And then things kind of like fall apart after World War II for American auto industry. There was some really, based on what I saw, it's like Americans started looking at like
Yeah,
non-functional styling at the expense of economy and safety. It was like, if it looks good and it feels comfortable, like it doesn't matter that it gets like 3 miles per gallon. And then you start getting these big American like boat cruisers.
these big, these bill cruisers, but then that starts to shift right with the 1960s
Yes.
a little bit. There was a little bit more things started to shift towards that. Obviously, that's why in the 50s you have those like 3 miles to the gallon, like super, just
Oh,
sucking up all
huge,
the
comfortable, comfortable,
gasoline
comfortable.
type of stuff. Well, that's what happened too. Yeah, the 1960s had more federal like environmental standards and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Safety issues also became more of a public concern. The introduction of the catalytic converter, as federal regulations became increasingly utilized and stuff like that. And then by the 1970s, there was a lot of other issues. They had foreign imports were becoming increasingly more common from German Volkswagen, Japanese
Yeah.
Toyota, different alternative styles to the Americans, right? Car styles that cut into the market. And then really the big thing, I guess you would say, would really be the 1973 oil crisis.
Yeah.
It was looked at as being a catalyst event in the history of American cars, because when that happened, these gas guzzling cars, because the price of gas was so expensive, which is it's going up now too. I'm sure people have noticed
Oh,
that
this
too.
is
Like the gas
insane.
is going up constantly. That's why you see more and more people, I guess, going out buying hybrids, and you're not getting those giant cars as much anymore, just because the big three were struggled to adapt to this, and you had to basically downsize, and it was hard. It was hard to do.
Yeah.
It had
Yeah,
to be bailed out
especially
in
and then
1979 from the government. Yeah.
yeah. Well, first oil thing was 73, then 79, as you said. Yeah, I mean, you could see pictures of this, and I'm sure some of our listeners remember the waiting online for gasoline. There's a couple of things you mentioned here that are interesting. Well, obviously, the 1960s, you have the standards for automotive safety with safety. Then there was 65 emission pollutants laws, energy consumption laws of 75. But the thing that you brought up that was cool is that there's this U.S. is being kind of infiltrated by foreign cars, and the German Volkswagen Bug, the Beetle, was basically historically viewed as the modern Model T. I mean, that thing was everywhere. It was an affordable, and I mean, it really was. It was kind of initiated by Adolf Hitler, and Volkswagen meaning Volks people, Wagen car. But when you look at the 70s, everyone could afford a Bug. Like that was Model T of its time,
Yeah.
and it wasn't American, which is why it really hurt American automobile, industry. Which again, I thought that was kind of sad in a sense. Um. Anyway, what else do I have here that I thought was kind of interesting? Buh, 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 buh. You got
What
anything?
are we looking? What are we looking at? They basically have the
Well, let's look at the
foreign
Japanese. I
dominance
think
group.
yeah, and I think we should talk about. I mean, I was going to get into like Japanese takeover.
Yeah, basically the dominance grew. The Japanese cars became more popular. It forced companies to basically being forced to limit the number of exports that they were able to produce,
Yeah,
take advantage of the exporting the luxury cars to the U.S. There was increasing profit margins. By the end of the '80s, basically there was a brief renaissance of American car industry because the oil prices went down. But all the big three, particularly GM, adapted well to the new technological innovations
innovations. Yeah,
at the time. Yeah, like fuel injection, disc brakes, stuff like that. But also the big three started to invest in foreign car companies.
yep.
As I mean, to try to limit the competition. But again, it's just more and more coming in, more and more coming in. And then a lot of and by the '90s, Honda, Toyota, Volkswagen, BMW, they all opened manufacturing plants, in the United States, and that really started showing the decline of the big three
Yeah.
over time because of this. This is
Yeah.
basic competition. It was they cornered the market for so long. They had 5% of the market, and then just with there was more options started opening up. You're not gonna have that
Well,
control as much anymore. It's just there's just more options now. Again, you
and
know.
the options what's important because of the '70s and the oil embargo and crisis. I mean, the cars from Japan were basically smaller and more fuel efficient, less polluting, much safer. You name it. Like it's almost as if you like I don't want to say that, but at the same time, if you look at older restrictions, political restrictions that are happening in the '70s on automakers, like you need to make your cars safer, the pollution has to be better, fuel efficiency has to be better. And this is all coming from through legislation, and the American car companies are really kind of slow to adapt to that,
Yeah,
while
they
the
just didn't catch
Asian
they
cars
just
already
didn't
had
catch
it.
up. Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah, they
the
already
Asian
had it.
cars already had it. Boom.
They met those regulations, and then the American companies are just kind of slow to adapt, and that's what basically happens. And then obviously they're already on a major decline, and then the 2008 recession, just that was it. That just was a devastating blow to those industries. Ford emerged pretty much okay, right?
Yep.
Chrysler and GM were devastated. They all requested financial aid from the government. They got bailouts from President Bush, if I'm sure you remember that.
Yep.
Chrysler declared bankruptcy, right? They eventually partner up with that's one of the
Fiat.
they
That was
partner up with
Fiat, right?
Fiat, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But overall, I think kind of to cap this off, this brief history of American automobile. Um, I mean, there's no question about it. Automobile completely changed the United States, right?
Yeah,
Obviously,
because most people still drive cars to work in the United
of
States.
course. Yep.
Other countries, it's they take mass transit, but the United States
Yep.
is still predominantly you drive. Just look how many of your students drive to school.
Yep.
Like you think of that many teenagers get a car, and they're driving around.
Besides the fact that we're talking about petroleum industry and just gas industry, it also was the chief consumer in the 1920s when cars really became big in the United States. It was the chief consumer of petroleum, but also of steel. Steel industry really kind of was helped out by the car industry. It was also biggest consumer in many other industrial like technologies like steel, petroleum, but at the same time rubber. You need glass for you need leather for inside. I mean, these are all different. Um, Products that now needed to be produced because of the car. Also, it completely stimulated American participation in outdoor recreation. So tourism actually grows. Service
Oh yeah,
station, as you
right,
mentioned
yeah.
before, right? This like
Route,
motels.
Route 66, all those stuff. Like it
Yep.
just creates a whole other part of American culture with the car.
And also, I was able to read up. It said that the automobile basically ended rural isolation. It was brought like urban amenities were brought to like very rural areas. So, better medical care, better schools. Usually, if anything, if you lived on a farm in the United States, which primarily was agriculture, even in the 1920s and 30s, um, like you had a tractor. That was pretty much it. And now this brings the doctors in. This allows you to travel, go to a modern city that surrounds your area, and kind of, you know, ended that isolation. Also changed the architecture of just American home. I mean, think about it: homes with garages. I mean, which I don't understand. I had a house. My first house was built in 1956, and you look at 1950s cars, and they're huge, and my garage like barely fit like my 2000 something car. And I thought to myself like, how did this fit a 1956 Chevy? But then I realized like now we put so much stuff in our garage. I think back then they just put a car in there.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't,
what it
I
was.
don't
It
know.
was for a car. Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, homes change. Like today, you look at a house, you buy a house, you look at for the garage. That wasn't a thing before 1920s. That completely changed. In 1980, which is when United States automakers were over pretty much the Japanese overtook them. 87.2% of American households owned one or more motor vehicle. 51% owned more than one. And they said that fully 95% of domestic car sales in 1980 were for a car replacement, not for a new car. It was just like, hey, it's something new came out. So yeah.
It's what it is.
It is what it is. Anyway, I thought this was we did it. I find this interesting. I mean, we drive cars all the time. That's why I was like, what's the
history? A little bit of history, yeah. I mean, everyone probably listening was definitely in a car. Probably sometimes
or they're listening in a car while they're driving.
It could be, yeah.
Could be. So now you know.
Eyes on the road.
Eyes on the road. That's right. No clicking buttons. Anyway, so to everyone out there, thank you so much for tuning in once more to our podcast. We really greatly appreciate it. Wherever you are listening to this podcast, please feel free to leave us a review. They are greatly appreciated. And if you need to contact us, just you could find us at www.historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com, which I just retooled that website and it looks a little better. I would say
very fancy.
Pat myself on the back a little bit. But anyway, thank you so much, guys, and I hope everyone has a great week. We'll see you guys next week.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.